Good afternoon, everybody. We are on. My name's Glen Hougan, and thank you for inviting me, and there was Mike. I'm going to talk about a subject that doesn't get talked a lot about, which is ageism. And so I'm going to talk about it, reframe it, and kind of the journey I've taken. But it'll be definitely relevant for everybody about a prejudice that's kind of hidden. And it's an interesting prejudice because unlike sexism or different isms, we will all get older. And it's also for in design as our population ages. It'll be interesting to look at this. So I'm going to take you through a journey that I took as I started to understand it. So I have a consulting company, Wellspan Research Design. I do some design around aging for Blue Zone, and I also teach at Nascade University. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the design classes also that sort of reinforced ageism within the students that I was teaching. What's interesting is you had Donald Norman here a few weeks ago. What a coup, great. And I always loved Donald Norman, and he did this in Fast Company talking about this, and I actually wrote him, and he sent a nice email back, and I wrote him to say, I feel the issue is that a lot of times the designers that are designing for this population group are kind of imparting sort of ageist attitudes in the design. And I think for me the issue is how do we address those ageist attitudes so they don't get reflected in the services or the products that we are delivering to this older population group. And as to me as I am getting older, as to all of us as we get older. So the story starts here. And this was interesting. So I had started to develop, my background was in human factors, and I thought, oh, I'll develop an aging suit. Now, if you noticed, I call it my ageist suit, because all it did was just reinforce negative stereotypes about older people. So I would do conferences and workshops with it, and it was kind of a fun way. You'd put on the suit, and of course I would restrict it. So you just restrict all of this. It was all range of motion. I wasn't dealing with any cognitive issues. I would always restrict the range of motion a little bit, and nobody would feel it. So I'd have to do it a lot, right? I would restrict it, and it was all these range of motions. And then people would get in them, and they'd be shuffling, and people would be groaning, go, oh my goodness, I don't want to get older. Because that was, again, it was reinforcing that idea as we get older, we're going to be shuffling, hunched over, in pain. And that's what my suit did. So I now call it my ageist suit. Another interesting thing is I used to have students do it in my classes, and it was a fun experience, right, to them to try to recreate what it might feel. So there was definitely some empathy involved. But when I first did it, so up in the corner you can see some of the students, I first did it 1 year and they came to present. And I thought I had done all of this sort of background research or work on having them be sensitized to an older population. And one of the groups came and they had their things, and then they said, oh, let me get in the mood. And they brought out this and put it on. Now, this is, they put on an old man's mask, and you can buy these for Halloween. You can go as, and we all know it, right? The crazy eyebrows as you get older, and it was the crazy old man. And that's actually a Halloween mask. You can go as Halloween. And I do believe when I was a kid, I went as the old man. Now, think of that as going as another effort, putting on blackface or something like that, it wouldn't be accepted. But you can still do this about it. And I thought, oh, wow. And I said, and they were serious. They thought, this makes me, oh, I'm getting in the part. I'm going, no, it's a mask. Another group came in, and they had clothes on. And they must have gone into the very back of the Salvation Army, picked out the ugliest, wrinkly suit you could find, and put it on. And I said to them, is this what you think older people are wearing? And it was this perception, and I thought I had done everything to sensitize to them. And it really forced me to look at how ingrained ageism is, and also the prejudice that I hold. So it was really looking at the prejudice that I held, because in making this kind of suit, and it got lots of publicity, but it was all and I did Good Morning America, PBS, flew up, but they played it as a joke. as opposed to something, and it was this groaning, and they would elaborate, like they would put on the suit and go, oh, this is so hard. And of course, it reinforced everything. So it was my journey. It was then going, I got to deal with ageism here, both within myself and within my students. So this is the journey. And ageism, and Robert Butler coined it in 1969, deep-seated uneasiness on the part of the young and the middle-aged, to the distaste of growing old, disease, disability, and fear of powerless, uselessness, and death. And here's an interesting one. This is Nelson, another gerontologist, is a prejudice against a feared future self of what we will become. And I think the idea is this our feared future self? So when you look at this, what does it bring up? When you see it? Loneliness, isolation, and all of that. And is there some fear in us we will be left alone at the end of our life, staring out or doing like this? Now, we can create a different context out of it, because this is what she was reading. Does that change the narrative? It does. So our projection of what this woman is doing is quite different when you change the narrative about the context. And I don't know what she's doing. She may be reading that book. And remember, this is interesting. It was a little old because it's a bipod shuffle. But one thing I did find for our seniors, they are using technology, but not the newest stuff. So it's always interesting when people design for them. And I did some work at the Mayo, and they all had iPhones, but not the newest generation. Because at a certain point in your life, I don't need the newest generation. Like, this is good for the next 5 or 10 years. So it was interesting. They are using technology, but be aware it's not always the latest. So when you design, think of that. But, and maybe she's listening to music. Maybe she's painting. There, I put oh, these are really pixelated images. There's your, what chair? Eames chair. Yeah, Eames chair. Well, what if she's sitting in an Eames chair? Why, how would that change the contents of looking at this person and interacting with them? So I think we take cognitive shortcuts. And part of the cognitive shortcuts is we tend to group people, right, when we see them. Sometimes it's on the clothes you're wearing, your age, your ethnicity, your gender, and things like that. And it helps us navigate when we interact with people, right? So the problem is, and these are signage that actually got pulled down in England. But it is a cognitive shortcut because we see that. Not that all of them use canes, but they thought this was quite stereotypical. So what are some of the, everybody recognize who this is? Carl Fredrickson from Up. What are some of the cognitive shortcuts that the designers took? What? Grumpy old man. Suit. That is kind of very the bow tie and stereotypical stuff. Tweed. They put him in tweed. Now, you don't see anybody. You go out there and walk, you'll see nobody in tweed. The tennis balls on the bottom, right? Adaptation, things like that. The belt up really high. So again, these are how we perceive a population, and it's very ageist. So we do take what we call these cognitive shortcuts, and you have to, right? Because you have to navigate a population group. We have to be careful, just as you might do cognitive shortcuts with different ethnic groups or genders, that if it limits you of how you see that group, there's a problem with it, and they can't break out of this. So there is different ways, the product semiotics, as we interact with people based on the products. There's a narrative associated with it, because in the movie, didn't he need this? Because he was on an adventure. And this is a Nordic walker. They're both assistive aids. And research seems to show that you will interact with someone differently based on the products that they would have. And you will interact with this person based on kind of this clunky looking thing, a medical looking product, differently than this person who you think is fit and walking. This person is using it as an assistive aid because they're frail and need it this person is very active. And be aware of it, and you will talk to them differently based on that, based on the products that you see them with. And when you see a senior population with a lot of medical-looking products, you interact them based on it's medical. So they're sick, they're infirm, and things like that. So there is an opportunity to redefine a narrative about the products that they're using, even if they're assistive aids, because these are two types of, they're kind of an aids, they're used differently. So this was Gretchen Anderson. I thought it was a really good, if we are what we use, it seems that the elderly people in today's society are cranky, stupid, and tacky. And you will notice a lot of products that will get around that. Looking at the products made for the elderly really says more about what product designers and manufacturers think the elderly are. So here is a product. And you may, for 30 bucks, you can buy it. Does anybody know what it is? For what?
For delivering babies?
It's for a senior, so unless they're really... Possibly with technology now and advances in science, but no. I'll come back to it later. But it has that, as someone said, a lot of products have that whiff of a hospital about them, right? Yeah. Oh, you know, and that. So that's a lot of the products because they're medical-looking products. Any other guesses? Well, yes, doesn't it have that? And you could use it like that. We'll get back to it later, and I'll tell you what it is. I think there's 6 things that designers get wrong about aging, and this is sort of with my students and also what I got wrong. First thing is, aging is an individual process. So I was trying to do it, just, you know, at 25 or at 75, you lose this range of motion in your elbow and your things. Doesn't happen that way. We all will go through our process quite differently. There's different rates of aging. There's different variations in lifestyle. It's really an individual process. And me in attempting to do this, which is now a silly suit, because I was trying to say, okay, this is what happens at this age, this is what happens at this age, and this is what happens at this age. Certain things will happen as you age. You will lose range of motion, especially here, right? Because and you will lose a little bit of range of motion, but it happens differently for different people. So it is very much an individual process. I learned that with my aging suit. The diversity, and although you're, so do people know who these are? Okay. Annie Lennox, Mick Jagger. So the diversity of their music, right? So this is Tony Bennett, the crooner from the 40s and 50s, Mick Jagger rock and roll, and I guess Annie Lennox is the 80s synth music, kind of rock and roll. I was trying to find hip hop. They're just before this. So we're actually getting a rap and hip hop generation coming in. And you're also, as you move it, and interesting, when that generation comes in, you'll see a diversity. I'm not showing the diversity in ethnicity, right? So you're just seeing all white people. But you are seeing a diversity in their music. And understanding the context of this person's life to design for. And it's tough because he grew of age in, I think Tony Bennett's about 87. And he grew up, so he's born in the 30s, 32 or something, came of age, grew up through definitely the 30s, the 40s, the war years, came of age in the 50s. And understanding that context of the person you're designing for. Just as his music was never as good as it is, your music, you'll be listening to it, right? As you get older, it's never as good as the music you're listening to now, right? But all of these people, there's such a diversity, and in fact, we tend to lump 65 and 85, and that's a 20-year gap. It's like saying someone who's 40 and 20 is the same. And in fact, they say they are much more diverse because they've lived a life and they're going through much more different things than younger people. So it's a very diverse group. The life course is quite different. So I went and visited, so I'm in my mid-50s, went and visited my friend who I graduated high school with. He's retired and a grandfather. I've got a 15-year-old who's running around with my spouse. I'm on a different life course. And you have to understand that sometimes people's life courses, you're designing around a life course and not around a chronological age. And there's also a difference between a chronological age and a felt age. And that's quite different. And when you design stuff like this, that you still don't know what it is, but you always look at, you think it's a chronological age. Oh, this is for someone who's 75. And there is that thing where that the group go, well, I don't feel 75. Why are you designing me these ugly looking things? So again, understanding that people feel younger than what you may view them as. The reality versus the fear of aging, and this was a few. So memory loss, what people expect and what people experience, quite a gap. So our perceptions is always a little bit more worse than the reality of it. So again, how many people have a good relationships with friends that are over 75? Just hang out with?
My grandmother, does that count?
Other friends. You can say not family members.
I consider her a friend.
Yeah. No. Sorry, they is a friend. Someone outside of a family. We don't have a lot of interactions, even myself as I'm getting older. There's not a lot of interactions other than with my mother or my daughter, with my...
She does have friends that are like in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah. I will say women do a lot better job of aging than males. But a lot of us just on a day-to-day basis just don't interact with people over a certain age group, really, at all. And that was something when I talked to my students, none of them, other than can say a grandparent, didn't really interact with it. And sometimes there's some family baggage with family relationships that's quite different. But we don't have a lot of interaction with that group, so why would we know them? Like, how can we design for a group that we don't know? And we get this wrong. What is old and what is frail? And I'll talk a little bit about frailty about that. So those are some of the things I think we get wrong. And after that, I took Valerie Braithwaite, who was looking at reduction of prejudice, and I kind of took hers and kind of adapted it to how could we plan for reducing ageism in design. You know, sensitivity, the stereotyping of older people. So I've tried to do this in my class. Greater exposure to the diversity of older people, having them meet older people that maybe aren't their grandparents. Deliberate use of perspective taking to see older people as an individual. Greater commitment to recognize the diversity of products. And I will say that I fall into the trap of doing these assistive aid products too, but they are using a wide variety of products that we don't think of. Intergenerational design cooperation. I've actually had students do an intergenerational where they both came as equal members, and it's been really good. Social attractiveness through attractive design. So this, whatever it is, what could it be? This is not an attractive design, and a lot of their stuff aren't attractive. Now they're getting a lot better. Educate for that, promote empathy, design for growth and independence and interdependence instead of degeneration and dependency. Review policy of other professions, and remember, ageism, they are finding, is across the board and across cultures. So you assume that a collectivist culture would be better with aging, and in fact, some of the research is showing that individualist cultures actually have a better job of viewing aging than collectivist cultures, of seeing the positive aspects of aging, which you wouldn't think. Because some of the collectivist cultures is an obligation to look after an older population. Doesn't mean you value aging. It means you value that it's a family member. So they're finding it also as societies industrialize. You're finding that, and also technology gaps that are happening with the younger generation, the older, that devalue the role that an older person might play in life. And I always think mandating, so I used to run a course for aging for population. Really fun course and really informative for the students. So I'm going to talk now about 4 factors I think contributes to ageism, specifically in design. One is our user focus. So this is some work I did for Dr. Kenwick. Do people know the Visual Frailty Index? It's online now. But I was brought in to help with their visuals, and I'm not a graphic designer, I'm an industrial designer. But what I found is so the big thing is trying to understand frailty, because that's where the costs come in. And what I'm finding is that when I design for an aging population, and most people, we're not designing for this area, we're designing for the frailty end. So when you look at designing for an aging population, you're really mostly designing for frailty, at least in products. The industry sector, health, the care, and the medical, research is showing that they are just as ageist, if not more. And the reality for the caring sector is, who are they caring for? This group. So are they caring for the healthy older adult? No. So this is the group that they're seeing most often. They're seeing the sick and the frail. And that starts to cloud their opinions of older people, or of that age group. They're not seeing the healthy, right, because they don't go to hospital. So they are finding that these industries are also very ageist. There's not a lot of talk about it within the medical institutions and things like that. Another area is the categories. Because of that, you're finding a lot of assistive aids, monitoring, and care facilities. So this is a product I worked on, and it was a seat assist, right, from getting out. But you are finding the categories is around aids, monitoring, and of course the facilities to care for the seniors. So you're getting a category, and then the focus becomes on accessibility, functionality, and control. And a lot of even the systems that you might be setting up for older people in terms of online things, there's this whole control decision support tools controlling this group here, as opposed to giving them control. And there's some interesting things. So what happens when you start to design, you're addressing health, caregiving, medical sector's needs. It's their needs in the control of a frail population through the design of aids and monitoring programs, products, and spaces. So it's really a control issue, and it's a little bit ageist that's happening. And some of it's just, sometimes there is a need to monitor groups of people, but most of it's all focused around that. I'm doing my little thing. 7 designer shortcuts that you, or that at least I take, or have taken, and still probably I'm taking. Here's the shortcuts we take. And I'm going to use these 2 people. So you're also getting a group of, they're both using walkers. Now, interesting in this, and these both groups, we interact with them sometimes the same. Baby speak and elder speak. And have you seen that elder speak? You know, maybe it's some woman that's been a judge and she's 85 and someone goes, "Well, dearie, how are you?" People internalize this. They think they're stupid. When you speak to them like they're an idiot, they will then internalize it, and the research is sort of showing it. So now they may be hard of hearing, but they're not stupid. So part of that's interesting. So I'm going to look at how we approach these 2 groups, because there's a lot of similarities in there. They're both using walkers. Someone gets a little bit more choice. Now these, with the rollators, they're getting a little bit more choice. But man, this choice for this group is getting quite a bit. So how do we approach 2 kind of marginalized groups that have a loss of control? So shortcuts we take. One, we always talk about the customer user experience, or sometimes it's the patient experience. We don't really say, oh, the user experience of a kid, right? It's really about the human condition that they are at that point. So the shortcut is that we always seem to talk about a customer or user experience. And some people, as someone said, Glenn, you know where else they use the word user? Drug addicts. Always a user. Which is interesting, isn't it? Or the customer or the patient experience. So what's one shortcut? The next is we're always dealing with definitely the functionality, right? It's about how functional this thing is, as opposed to, does this person fit with who this person is right at that point of their life? And you do, like, this person needs a mobile device that looks like a lot of fun, right? Doesn't look like a lot of fun or engaging the person. So again, how can we always deal with the functionality? We always seem to do tech fixes over social fixes. And that's a tough one, right? Because I know as a designer, we get money for the tech fixes. and we think it's going to solve the problem. And there is a role for it, but in reality, in life, what do we really need? Do we need this, or do we need just a social wheelchair that you can have a conversation with someone who you're walking with? Because think of right now, someone in a wheelchair, and most of the people aren't that they're pushing, you're talking to someone's back of their head. It's really weird. A lot of times when you're trying to have a conversation with them. So where do we need to put our energies? Could be a combination. This is where industry likes to, and this is where it's kind of sexy, right? But is this more helpful about a conversation you're having within? So again, the social aspect, if technology enhances that social aspect, I think that's a value. We also then design around someone's disability as opposed to someone's ability. And they still have ability, but we always look at it as a disability. We get pity and empathy confused, and there's a stereo content model where they looked at how people are looked at in terms of how people are viewed and prejudiced. And it's the warmth and intelligence. So on one side is warmth and this side intelligence. So as an older person, you're seeing highest warmth and low on intelligence. So it's that doddering but dear. When an older person gets higher on intelligence and they're seen as intelligent, they're viewed as less warm. Cranky old man. So they can't win. So, and it's interesting about that, how we prejudice. So it's that idea that sometimes as you're older and you're just advocating for your rights, you're seen as cranky. So we get those a little bit, and I think we design around pity too much as opposed to empathy. And dependence on systems that we're designing, that they're dependent on things, as opposed to independence, or I would think a better word is we need interdependence, because interdependence is more of a connection that we have through intergenerational things. And we are all interdependent. We're not independent. And I think that's a better sort of thing. And we always design around to protect this group. We do a little bit, but it's more about security, providing security for this group. And so those are some of the shortcuts. And this is what happens if I'm taking how the shortcuts this is what we tend to do for designing for an aging population. It's always around the user, it's functionality, tech fixes, it's about their disability, how do we solve. There's a little bit of pity happening there. Definitely it's dependence on systems, and sometimes it's a healthcare system that get dependent, and it's about how do we protect these people. And I think we need to reframe the narrative around design. It's a human-centered approach about your human condition of where you are at that point. It's about the fit to the person. It's about identifying social fixes. Not to say technology can't play in enhancing the social aspect of who we are. It's about the person's ability. You design around that. Empathy, independence, or I would say maybe interdependence. And it's about providing security as opposed to protection. So that is kind of where I've evolved designing for dignity, and that's kind of the journey I've taken now. So I try to look at this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some research I did at the Mayo Clinic, and I wanted to do research around ageism within institutions. They did not want to do it, which was interesting, but we don't want to talk about that. So this is the Mayo Clinic down in the States. So I did look at it saying, okay, I want to see what seniors and people are doing to make things better in their environment. So I was looking at the idea of product hacks, the idea that they're hacking their environment because things are not designed for them, and what we can learn from them. And if you want to find it, it's online in Pinterest, and it's all of these hacks, some of them done by seniors, some of them designed by caregivers, and I was looking at do-it-yourself hacks. So I wasn't looking at these ones that you can buy, which is always difficult because if you're having a hard time pouring it, you might have a hard time putting a full thing in and I'm looking at these little things, little trays, right? Which is smart. So what can we learn about what people are doing to make their life better? So here's a product, and we all can't do that, right? So here's let's do our back. Now, this is even, I don't think I could use it. I couldn't orientate myself, right? This is hard. If you're having a hard time reaching your back, and these are 4 older people, that I don't think I could do that if I'm having a hard time with the mobility. So what could be solutions? What can we learn? Well, what if you took these 3 things? What do you think is going to happen here? This is a product hack. Now, I'm not saying it's good design, but what can we learn from this? Low cost, one of the big issues was this, washing your hair. It was a big issue. Now, is there something here? Now, because literally you're kind of, I gotta have hair to do it, but there's some nice things here, right? So what can we learn from, and this is the voice of seniors saying, okay, here's a low-cost thing I can set out. I identified a number of things. So they're always modifying things, and a lot of it's controls, right? Modifying height, putting information on the top of pill containers, because that's when they're looking down. They're also repurposing things, pulling a strap, soap in a stocking, which is great, isn't it? Way better than soap in a rope, because what happens with soap in a rope? It falls out, right? So again, some really neat thinking, and probably a nice sort of feels good on your skin, right? It stretches around, and the soap goes down, and you can wash it and things like that. Inventions, some of them, these are getting a little bit pixelated, really kind of strange inventions there. Probably not working, but it's the idea of these functional day activities of dressing and things like that. Signals and warnings. How far to go over. How many people have walked into a screen door? So why aren't these things, why don't, we've all done it, right? And as your eyesight, why can't we put some, like a Mona Lisa, so at certain times of the day, the Mona Lisa figure comes out of your screen door or something, it's built into the fabric or something. I don't know, but there's some really interesting things here. So what can we learn from people that are living this life? And there's some smart stuff here. And then I went into people's homes. So you've got someone where they're designing things, they can't get it's all very seamless, right? And what this also indicates of what is important for her. So Peggy just bought a bunch of these things and started putting them all the dials that she could understand of what she needed to use. So again, tactiles, right? And we want to design things that are seamless. But it may not be good because there's still this tactile feel. Cliff, the caregiver, was looking after his wife who had early stage Alzheimer's, was doing a number of things for her. This was something, he had developed a bib. And this was a casino clip, and he actually, this is in the States, in the senior home, he was making a bunch of these clips where he could go down, instead of putting a baby bib on his spouse, he felt it was humiliating, he could just take the napkin and clip it on and put it around. Cliff was also, he said, I must say, Glenn, I'm also doing the laundry now, so I definitely don't want to be washing, so that was part of it. But some really smart stuff. They designed things so he can look down the hallway and see if it's locked or not. Again, these adaptations that people make. Mr. Fixes, you also got a generation that fixes things. So you know what? He's putting it in a black box here. And he actually solved this, and you can buy this for like $400. He just made a black box. He's putting his mouse in it, so when he clicks, he's not moving his mouse, and the cursor, because he was clicking a cursor, doesn't move. And he was just clicking it because once it's in the black box, the light stops the cursor from moving. Because he used to hold his mouse and knock it and never get that cursor back on the thing. So he had solved this, which was interesting. And I looked at if people had done, someone in Britain had spent all this money, and it was $400, and this guy did it with a wooden box, which was really interesting. But you can see some around mobility devices. Jerry, who was doing adaptations, so there's a lot of mobility. He's watching birds. There's a nice, he's got books up. So these are all these hacks that people were doing. And then I went through all of them, and I have over 400 hacks. You can go on Pinterest. These aren't on Pinterest because these were in someone's home. But emergency, right? Great in bed. And this is at the Mayo clinics where you're in an emergency in your bed and you pull down. So what's the problem there? You're pulling a cord this way. That switch is not going to come down, is it? So he takes the switch. So when he pulls it, it actually pulls the switch down because when he's pulling it this way, and he said, it's usually in bed, I need people to come and help. So again, this was a facility that had designed the emergency, and in bed he couldn't do it. So the interesting thing, and I'll tell you a story, so it got lots of play because people were really interested in these hacks. And this was so it got in the Wall Street Journal, and they asked, well, Glenn, give us your 10 best hacks. And I really couldn't pick, although I love soap into stocking. I went through them, and there was some gadgetry that people were, but you notice they stopped at 9. They didn't pick my 10th. And it was my number 1 hack. It was the one that was the best hack that I saw everybody doing. And there was something interesting about not giving voice to what they're doing. And these are all a little bit gimmicky kind of hacks, right? They were setting up their own medication management system because people were giving them this little stuff. They're going on an old Excel thing and taking it to their doctor. They were identified a problem in the system, which was medication management. They were being overprescribed. They weren't being given any tools, and they were creating their own tools here, which I thought was really interesting. Now, why didn't Wall Street Journal report on this? Because it's not the quirky visual thing. It doesn't fit into a narrative, I think, about older people, which was all this kind of quirky stuff. It was actually a critique of the system of, okay, you're giving me all these pills, overprescribing, and you're kind of saying, oh, go out and buy those daytimers or whatever and manage it yourself. And they were actually taking it to their doctor, and their doctor was thanking them and saying, oh, thank you, because it was not just prescription drugs, non-prescription drugs, it was everything that they had in. So over the years, I've kind of, I said, what can I learn from these hacks and start to develop products? So I had some funding, created this sort of design, and these are some of the products. And I started with medication management, and I started to document what people were actually doing. And you notice that they were keeping them in shoe boxes, dollar store boxes, all together in the kitchen. And out of that, and talking to people and understanding some of the hacks, started to develop a system, and they wanted a system around medication management that's color-coded, around a kit, and around these. So there was literally this, which also has a little groove because everybody was scared of taking their day pills and the pills falling out in their purse. So what are they doing? They're putting an elastic band around it. So there's a little area that you can actually put elastic band, which is smart because the fear of, I mean, there's nothing worse than your medicine kind of falling out, right? And a lot of these little daytimers aren't very good because they're the cheap stuff. They wanted it that it wasn't so seen. It was a portfolio. And this is all kind of based on what people were doing and saying to me. Here's an interesting one. So why are they doing that? There's a documentation. What's the?
They don't want to change the roles. So they put it in the drawer.
They still got to change the drawer rolls.
But they don't have to adjust.
So there's it could be that too, right? Yeah.
Is it hard to reach to reach back there?
Think of it. Think of where a lot of, in a home. So you've got someone with limited mobility, and actually at the Mayo Clinic and their new things, they had it in the back there. So think about someone reaching over, and you may be pulling. So what is also the problem that with toilet paper that we've all done? Or the cat on it, you know that idea? So if you've got one hand and you're pulling it off, they can sit there, it rolls out, and when they tear it, so some smart thinking, accessibility, and it's not the in front of them, which can get knocked over. So part of it is what can we learn and what kind of products can be developed from. I think I don't think I have a view of the product. You'll have to see it. It was on the other thing. But there was a handheld one. And what else were people doing? I was asking people, oh, I always stamp on my toilet paper roll for my mother. Why do they stamp on toilet paper rolls? Fum, 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 fum. it's easier to rip, right? So, I'll just go back. That was it. So I think this is an older one, but actually when you put the toilet paper roll, it actually created that oval. That would go, as you're pulling it, it'd be easier if you're pulling it from the side, you could rip it. And again, these were just, you just ask people and going, what are some, the commode. So I actually worked with two groups on this, both seniors and caregivers, because there's two really kind of stakeholders. So what is the main issue that you think might be the seniors for the commode? So everybody know what a commode is. It's in your room. Has that whiff of a hospital about it, right? Total whiff of a hospital. It is, has it. What do you think the issue for the seniors as you get older? Well, always sit to stand issues, right? Why won't people put it in their home? There's a smell. It's ugly. You've got someone, and it is a little bit of you know, if I can't make it's saying you can't make the toilet. That's why we have it in your room, and it's more ease of access. You've got grandchildren coming over. Grandma, what is that? Oh, that's my toilet and it's ugly, it smells. What about caregivers? The people that are cleaning. So what the caregiver said to me, so the senior said to me, make it look like something that doesn't look ugly and it's a little bit masked, that I'm not seeing this in the toilet room. And the caregiver said, can you redesign the slop bucket? And it is literally a slop bucket. It's a round thing. It's so embarrassing carrying this. And I might be walking by my client with this thing, and I'm going, and it's splashing all over. So whenever I take it, it was the bucket. So we actually built this. This is a computer image. We built it, and we actually put it on one of these camping stools that you could take it. And it was a system that, when it's not there, and it extends this way for some issues around bariatrics, that it's just sitting there. I mean, this was Baltic birch. But it would nest it in, and you'd put a cover over it. It would be easy to clean, secure in emptying it. But it had a different language about what a commode could be. Oh, this is bad. There it is. Wiping their bottom. I didn't know this existed. So I went to caregivers, and I said, what's the biggest issue that you have? And they said, do you know how, and this is in Halifax, Nova Scotia, you know how much it is paid to go out to someone's house to wipe their bottom, and how undignified it is. And then it really starts to think about, as a designer, the issues about it. And I've had people say, if I can't wipe my own ass, it's game over. Like, just shoot me. I mean, think about at the point in your life. And so for some people, it was a huge, huge issue about a navigation about with someone you may not know, that you're going over to their place, they are exposing themselves, and you're wiping their bottom. And you're using, as someone said, barbecue tongs or forceps, and you're putting the toilet paper in here, and you're doing that. And how can you create dignity within that, navigate that interaction? Hardest thing I've ever done. Hardest thing I've ever done in terms of getting over some of my phobia and my cowardness of going through that motion, of trying to feel what it feels like to have someone wipe your bottom as an adult. And I never quite got over it. I don't, but what they were saying is saying, you know, can you mask it? It's a toilet bowl. So we see this language in the bathroom. So it's not something, it's a head that is easy to put the toilet paper on and bunching it up. Now there is a number of things out there. I think this was $30. It's like, I bought it, it's crazy. And how do you create an experience both by caregivers and the individual? So a lot of these also connected with the commode. I built things with the commode that would be easier so it's connected with some of the others, how you could use it. Testing it, haven't. I mean, other than on myself and some other people, but I went to a place that I'm still not able to get there at the same time as you noticed that I've gone to design the most extreme element of our fear of aging. You can't wipe your own bottom. And in focusing on this was a little bit ageism, right? So you do fall a little bit into that trap because there still needs a lot of products around these assistive aids, which are so stereotypical older people. So at the end of the day, what I did feel is, how do you give these people voice in the design of theirs? Now, this is the design. It's a solution, right? But is it silly? Because the issue is he can't slide his he can't slide his cane. And you actually have people going out, and I've been to them, they cut tennis balls and put it on the bottom. Where else do you get tennis balls on the bottom of things? Where do you see it? Classroom kids. Little kids. Would you wear a tennis ball? Would you have a tennis ball on your? No. And people are thinking this is a good, and you can actually buy products where there are all these products that hook on your, and it's still putting a tennis ball in it. So I think that's still an issue of the voice of these people are having to do with this because they're not giving any choice, and they're not allowed to have voice. And what was interesting in the product adaptations is they were starting to give voice to what they thought would be solutions. And so that's been my biggest challenge is interacting with an age group that has a lot of baggage for me because my mother. Also an age group that I'm quite still ageist, and how do I give them voice in the design of services and environments and products, as opposed to doing what we normally do is control and monitor them, as opposed to sort of designing for dignity. So that's where designing for dignity came. So next month, I'm going to try to do this, where we are going to bring in people that use canes and design a better cane experience. Do you like my little thing, raising cane? At the same time, engineering students at Dalhousie are going to redesign the cane. And we're going to look at what are they both going to focus on. Now, we think we know what engineering students are going to focus on. I'm not sure what their issues are, because I don't know. And it's going to be totally driven by them about what it is that they want to do. And we're going to go through a workshop. It's going to be a design process. And we're going to actually have, at the end of the day, we're going to bring in engineering students to actually fabricate or prototype the canes. And we think we can do it within a day. So part of it, I guess the thing is, how do we give voice to a population that traditionally has not had a lot of voice? And interesting, as you get older, you lose your voice in society, right? You're not being valued. So that's kind of the journey I've taken, and it's probably something, as you are in the healthcare, will have to deal with too, as you're dealing with a population group that is also using healthcare services a lot. Thank you. Any questions, or what time are we at here?
We got 5 minutes.
Okay, sorry.
That was great. Yeah,
Mike? We have a microphone.
Yeah, so thanks, Glenn. Yeah, I don't know. A few things are sticking out to me. One thing that stuck out was around this idea that there's a certain perception that the elderly don't use technology, and I think that's slowly going away as I don't know, adoption increases, et cetera. But I thought that was really an interesting insight around that they still, your perception is that they use technology, they just might not use the latest version. And I think that's a useful insight, and also really a challenging one from a technical perspective, because we're always trying to keep up with the latest family of devices. But if, let's say say version 4 and we're on version 10 and 11, how do we pay for that? How do we keep that alive? How do we keep the older generations of devices and versions alive, just from a pure economic standpoint?
Yeah, I don't know, because the system set up is, like Apple will support it to a certain degree and then not, right?
Yeah,
so if you've got a population that might not be turning over their, because at a certain level they go, well, my cell phone works, works good enough, why do I need to do it? I don't know. I mean, that is sort of that almost planned obsolescence, right? That we kind of bought into, right? There's no longevity in our technology anymore, because it's either changing or they're just doing updates to make us constantly buy. You may want to, there may be an option when you do it, and because I always get a lot of startups that are coming here and wanting they're not thinking of that. They're not thinking about, they're thinking, okay, well, we've got this latest, it's all going to be this monitoring, this website, or this app or whatever. But I think that's something you definitely have to be aware of, because there's nothing worse, because now it forces other people to monitor them. Yeah. And they have no control over that technology if someone else is constantly updating it for them, and then someone will take that. So I think somehow, how do you provide for their control of that system as long as they can, because we know that when people control things, they feel better about themselves. And as you get older, it's a constant thing of giving up control, right? Giving up something. So how do you make it so it's not as that you're giving them some control? And it's understandable, right? It's a loss as you get older. And at the end of the day, people will take their own life journey, and some of it will be hunched over. Like, that's the reality. Some will be hunched over in a room, but that's not written in stone for most people. Yeah. It's a tough one with technology, right? Because you are getting a lot of, but if you think of it, it's still around monitoring and control. I always feel that that's still the main thing of how do we control this age group and monitor them for their health, as opposed to giving them some control about monitoring it. Because in the reality, when those people were doing the medication management, it was good stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, that was really good stuff, and it was all paper-based. Some of them were using Excel, right? An old Excel spreadsheet. So having them learn new stuff, it's really like anything. It's like, sometimes I don't want to learn new stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a tough one, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's the current situation right now with our current elderly, but obviously everyone's aging. So do you see that the kind of learned habit that we have is to desire that new and to update constantly with all our sort of like subscription-based services? Do you think that when like newer generations become older, do you think that we would kind of defer back to kind of the old thing because it worked, or keep having that desire to?
It's tough. I think we always fall back to comfort zone. So if they're talking about BlackBerry's not around anymore, but that generation 10 years ago, they're using BlackBerry in their 50s, are now retiring in their 60s, right? So they were still, and they might have moved on to a smartphone, some other things. So your people are getting savvy, but you still also, there's a certain point in your life is like, okay, I've got other things doing. I'm not constantly keeping up. Work environment, you have to, but if you're out of the work environment, it's not as essential for that to happen. So we always, a little bit like the music, you get stuck in that genre of music that you listen to as a kid, and it always, we do fall back on these things that are familiar. And technology will change because, who knows? Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years with this. I mean, what's happened in 10 years? Apps. When did apps come in? They came in the first iPhone, wasn't it? Or 2006, 7? It's not even 10. It was just 10 years ago, and it's kind of changed things quite a bit. I don't know how it will be. It's just, I think a smart design is how do you engage generations or engage anybody to take the best out of what that is. But it's not always a tech, so maybe it's a social fix. The interesting thing, I had my students document their grandparents' lives and looking at technology. And we came back with one of the constants between their grandparents' lives was they all had animals. And then we found out, of course the research shows people that have animals way healthier as an older person, So we designed around around their pets, like things that they could feed their pets, because we found that was more valuable for their health than technology. It was how do they keep their pets in their home longer? And it's interesting, there's not any money being put into that. We've got lots of money for the wheelchair that can go upstairs, but nothing and we know it works, it's proven. Research shows older person having a pet is way healthier. Socialization, routine, all of that. But yet we're still on the tech fix. Also, as someone said, when this idea that not trusting technology, so older people might drive slow, right? There's this idea, well, what happens when you see an accident? What's the first thing you do? You slow down, right? Caution. So there's something about that. And as this generation, and maybe they are right to be suspicious of where Capital One loses easy. They just lost all of this information, right, of your information. Maybe mine, I don't know. I don't know how it's lost. But constantly, whether it's Revenue Canada, so these systems are not foolproof at all. In fact, they are, that's why they call it the cloud, right? It is nothing, right? So there's also, what can we learn from them, the caution about these systems and technology, especially around their health and their control. And it's something that they feel that they don't control.
So as somebody who's designing these really innovative products, how do you see kind of the future of it? So taking it from what are innovative ideas and making it so that it can be affordable, that it can be widely produced and accessible. I guess how do you see this? I can imagine right now a lot of the products, well, not affordable, they can get them secondhand, and when you have these really well-designed products, but they're not easy to obtain. So what do you think needs to happen in order for that to develop? Do you see that as something that's going to?
Well, I mean, some of it is a cost, right?
Yeah.
So you might have people on limited income.
Yeah.
Some of it is it, so I think the ageism is that these ideas are being imposed on people. And I think you kind of try to do that as best due diligence of meeting their needs and designing it for them, but I still feel that if they're not in the design room, that's where I'm at, that if their voice isn't there, you're imposing a voice, and that voice might be something of your perception of what this age group. Now, I think if you had a lot of contact with this age group, and I don't, and as an older person, I don't know if many of us do, we are always guessing. And in some ways, just not even knowing. So early on, engage them, maybe about some of the issues, about like, why would you use this? So right now, I have one of my colleagues taking the Google Home, whatever it is, and putting it in people's places. And technology, and he's going, oh, they love it. Well, of course you love stuff you're getting free. Would you actually pay for it? And what do they love about it? Like, are they only using like 2% of its capacity? And then what is that? Then design for that 2% that they're using. So I think somehow is getting into the homes. And it's so there was that seed assist for that company that I was doing. They had designed it, done all the market, done everything, produced the product, and I said, well, have you tested it? Like, have you gone into people's homes to see where it's being used? So I went in and I called it rapid contextual design. One person was using it backwards, and it broke his chair. He didn't even know that. Two of them couldn't get it open to even engage the seat assist. Some of them said, you know what? There's my favorite chair. There's your thing. Doesn't fit on my favorite chair. I'm not using it. That's my favorite chair. Like, I'm not using it on this hard chair. So again, they had done everything. They had talked to people over phone interviews. Would you like a seat assist? Yeah. And then when you get into their homes, you're seeing how they're using it. Again, they were using it quite differently, and some of them, the guy that broke his chair was so upset, and he was using it backwards. 2 people were using it backwards because they were picking it up and moving it around all the time. And it wasn't just sitting on one chair. And their favorite chairs were nice and cushy, right? So this thing you're putting it on to lift you up was, and they're going, I'm not getting up. But for them, they said, there's nothing else out there. The idea of being stuck in your chair and not being able to get up is so scary. Like, think of it. You can't get out of that chair. You may not have the power. And they said, so they think, gave me the opportunity to get out of, so any sit to stand issue, get out of my chair. So it was very powerful at that. The company didn't solve it, but they had not gone into people's homes and maybe tested it within the environment that it might be used and watched them just using it. So the adaptation, I did some work for Herman Miller, and they're interested in how people were adapting hospital environments. So I just went in and documented it. And they had designed Herman Miller, I don't know if you know, this beautiful system, right? And so I was in the hospitals in the States, and people were doing all sorts of stuff to their system because it wasn't working. So what can we learn from the adaptation? So in some ways, it's a little bit of beta testing, giving it out to them, and then just asking them, how are you using it? What have you used? Oh, I've only used this piece of it. So I think as long as I don't think you're going to hit it, as long as you're sensitive to the issues and trying your best, yeah, that's all I try to do.
All right. I think we're at time.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, this was bizarre when they did it. It was so